Hello, everyone. And we have arrived at Wednesday of the 12th week in Ordinary Time, Wednesday, June 24th. And it's been wonderful to see some of you at Mass over this past week, and it feels good to begin some small steps back to a bit of normalcy, right? For the past 2 weeks, our reflections have been focused on voices of our time. If you Google tapestries in Los Angeles Cathedral, so just go into your browser and say tapestries in Los Angeles Cathedral, you will find a wonderful depiction of what our reflections are trying to convey. The artist who did those tapestries, John Nava, created them, and they are all around the worship space. And a couple years ago, I had the good fortune to be able to go and see them in person, and it really is breathtaking. The most prominent tapestries are the ones called the Communion of Saints, and there are 25 fresco-like tapestries that depict 135 saints, those who are considered blessed, and from all around the world, including those from North America who were canonized. And then there are about 12 or so untitled figures, including children, and they represent all of us through the ages who have tried to live holy lives, those who are giving good example right within our own midst. And if you stand in the center aisle and you're surrounded by these tapestries, they're all looking forward. And they're looking towards the great cross window that's there in the cathedral right above the altar. It is something wonderful to see if you get a chance to see it. And as I was standing there thinking about all of these men and women of all ages and races and occupations from all over the world, I really felt this sense of belonging to something much bigger than myself. Being a part of this church, our Catholic Church that has stretched across centuries, really gave me a sense of hope. And one of the persons depicted in one of those tapestries is this person, the one that I'm going to share about today, St.Rose Philippine Duchesne. She is a pioneer missionary of the Society of the Sacred Heart, who came to Missouri from France and founded the first free school west of the Mississippi in 1818. And there's a connection to her right around here. I'm sure you've heard of the Stewart Country Day School of the Sacred Heart, and that is founded in the spirit of the Society of the Sacred Heart. So right here nearby, we feel her influence as well. So a little bit about her life. Rose was born in France in 1769, one of 8 children, and she felt a call to religious life from a young age. And even though her father really objected to her becoming a sister, she had this deep desire and the courage to do it anyway, and she entered a visitation convent at age 18. Now, this is during the time of the French Revolution, and most religious houses were closed or suppressed. There was a great deal of suffering. Many people lost their lives. And for 11 years, Rose attempted to continue to still live as a visitation sister, even though she was home with their family. And she tried to serve them and those suffering from what has been called the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution, including those who were imprisoned and sick and those suffering. Once that time ended and she was free to live as a sister again, she purchased the building that had been the convent in which she had been living as a visitation sister. And several other women came back as well to join her. But they found that the difficulties that were there upon their return really made it quite hard to continue to live there. In 1804, Madeleine Sophie Barat made a call in person to Rose Philippine, Mother Barat had founded the Society of the Sacred Heart in 1800. And she had learned that the Visitation Sisters were struggling, and she met with Rose Philippine and invited her to come and be a part of the Society of the Sacred Heart. And Rose said yes. And she entered there, and they became lifelong friends and sisters in ministry. St.Rose Philippine Duchesne long wished to serve as a missionary in the New World, but it was another 13 years before she got permission to do that. So in 1818, at the age of 49, she and 4 other sisters set out from France to make their way to New Orleans. And once they got there, they found themselves on a boat and made their way up the Mississippi. And a bishop welcomed them and then missioned them to a small village of St. Charles, Missouri, where he had purchased a house for them. So it was there that she started the first community for the Society of the Sacred Heart in the United States, and the first Sacred Heart School opened on September 8th, 1818. And it was the first Catholic school in what would become the St. Louis Archdiocese, and the first free school west of the Mississippi. It wasn't easy running this school, as you can imagine, in the pioneer lands of that time, but they were still able to set out and open other locations as well. And vocations started to come to the Society of the Sacred Heart, and she opened a novitiate to welcome young women interested in religious life. And she founded other schools and other orphanages as well. Finally, her dream to work with the native peoples of the United States in 1841, she was able to join other sisters in Sugar Creek, Kansas, to work with the Potawatomi Indians, to establish a school there, and most especially to work with the girls who had been neglected. So she was 72 when she started this work among the Native Americans. And although she was older and had a difficult time doing some of the harder work, she spent much of her time in prayer, and the Native people gave her the name Woman Who Prays Always. That's a kind of neat name, Woman Who Prays Always. She died at the age of 83 in 1852. She had spent 34 years in America. And in 1988, she was canonized a saint by Pope John Paul II. So it's an interesting history. And what does she have to say to us today? So I think that she would have much to teach us about being creative and undaunted amidst hardship. Creative and undaunted amidst hardship. She wanted to be a sister, but then the French Revolution came along, but she didn't give up. She still followed the life as a sister anyway. And even when she tried to reestablish the Visitation Convent, she took the invitation of Mother Barat to join the Society of the Sacred Heart. She said yes to that invitation. She had a dream to serve God and to serve the poor, and she didn't let herself get stuck in what she hoped would have happened, because things happen that are unforeseen, but she readjusted. She saw new possibilities in order to keep focus on that vision of serving God and serving other people. And I think that's a really great example for us today. You know, we're all living through the unforeseen trials of the pandemic and the reawakening of the need of racial justice and reform. It's been a time for all of us to really look at the larger picture and what hopes we carry within our hearts. And even though these last few months are not what we expected, you know, we can ask ourselves, how are we being called to something new? Whether as individuals, whether as a parish or our communities. So through the example of St.Rose Philippine Duchesne, we are reminded that amazing things can still take place even if the path to get there is not what we planned. amazing things can still take place, even if the path to get there is not what we planned. I think she would also want to teach us about knowing that God's grace working through us allows us to do far more than we ever imagined we could do. You know, I never tire telling the story of women religious who created the Catholic school system in our country and the Catholic hospital system. They are the unsung heroines of bringing Catholicism in the United States and establishing it in ways that are still in place today. Just imagine it. The St.Rose and her companions in their 40s, they don't know the language of where they're going to. They get on a boat to cross the ocean, which I'm sure was not fun. They land in a place where anti-Catholic sentiment was rampant at the time. And to start from scratch, to create something from nothing. Now, we can either think that they're kind of crazy, or we can believe that they truly felt God's power and grace at work in them, and that through God, all of these things were possible. And I think that's something we need to hear today as well. You know, there's so many problems that face us, and I think it's easy to become cynical or indifferent. But what if we believed that it was just not on us to figure it out, but God was working through us? I mean, what if we really believed that God was working through us in this pandemic where we all need to make sacrifices in order to help everyone stay safe? And what about bringing about racial justice in our country? It's not easy, but do we believe that God is working through us in this moment? So through the example of St.Rose Philippine, we're reminded that God is at work in us, and we're not alone as we make our way. And lastly, I think she teaches us about looking out for those who are the most forgotten. Look out for those who are most forgotten. During the 17, 18, 1900s, there are countless stories of bishops here in the United States in need of those who would come and tend to the people no one else wanted to care for. Native Americans, immigrants, African Americans, women and girls, caring for soldiers during the war, caring for the sick during outbreaks of disease. These bishops and priests would travel around the country, and they'd go to Europe looking for sisters and other orders of men as well to come here and to serve those most in need. And even at the age of 72, she was happy to live among the Native Americans and focus on the needs of girls who were so often neglected. So through her example, we're reminded that we are called to look around us and to see who needs the message of Christ's love the most, who needs the message of upholding the dignity of every person, and will we reach out to them? So in closing, I'd like to share two of her quotes. Here's one. "He will never let the trial surpass the strength he gives you. And at the very moment you think you are overwhelmed, he will lift you up and give you peace." And another quote. "We cultivate a very small field for Christ, but we love it, knowing that God does not require great achievements, but a heart that holds back nothing for self. A heart that holds back nothing." So blessings to you and your family. And until we see one another again, which I hope is soon, I wish you and your families much peace.